Here are 5 pieces of gear that I wish I bought for my studio way sooner. What's up everybody, Mike here. I'm sure we've all had that moment where we buy something new for our studios and it's such a game changer, either in the way it sounds or the way it affects your workflow or whatever, that you can't help but wonder why on earth it took you so long to get it. These are my top 5 should have bought it sooner pieces of gear. So first up, we have the Dynamount. If you're not familiar with it, the Dynamount is basically a robot that you attach a mic to, allowing you to move the mic from an app on your phone or computer. They have a few different models, some that go side to side, forward and back, and even rotate. But I just have the basic version, which just goes in one direction. But buying this literally transformed my guitar tones. I know that sounds really dramatic, but I absolutely mean it. Before, I'd take my best guess at the mic position. If it didn't sound right, I'd go out to the live room, move it an inch, and then try to remember what it sounded like before. And that got the job done most of the time. But with a Dynamount, I can sit right in front of my monitors, move the mic while the guitarist is playing to the track, and find the perfect position. And especially with distorted guitars, even the tiniest little change can make a big difference to the sound. Like one position can sound nice and smooth, and then just a quarter inch from there can have a ton of weird resonances. So being able to dial it in that precisely is insanely cool. And it's repeatable too. So if you find a spot you like, but want to try out a few different positions, you can always get back to that first position. You can even save presets, say one for your rhythm tone and one for your lead, and then you can hop back and forth between them. The next piece of gear I wish I bought way sooner is a hardware synth. And more specifically, one with a keyboard and built-in effects. The 2 that I have that meet these criteria are the Behringer DeepMind 6 and the Roland JU06A. So here's the thing, when it comes to synths, I am an idiot. I know a lot about guitar and bass, a ton about drums, but synths confuse the heck out of me. And the majority of the bands I work with are more or less the same way. But every once in a while, a band would come in who were synth experts, and I would see how much synths could add to a song. But I could never get there on my own. I have a ton of synth plugins, but most of them are honestly way too advanced for me, with too many options and features I don't know how to use. So I'd just end up flipping through presets, hoping I'd stumble onto something usable. And even if I found a preset that was close, I probably wouldn't know how to tweak it to get it where I wanted it. So why is a physical hardware synth better? A few reasons. First, I find it a lot easier to learn. There's something about having my hand on physical controls that just help make everything click for me. Plus, being able to move multiple controls at once, something much more challenging to do with plugins, helped me understand how the different controls interact. Even just something as simple as moving the filter frequency and resonance controls at the same time. I was able to find cool textures and sounds that I could absolutely do with software, but just wouldn't think to do. And having the effects built in is also huge for me. For a lot of synth sounds, the effects are as much a part of the sound as the synth itself. And again, being a bit of a synth idiot, I often had a tough time knowing what effects might be needed or how a patch might sound after effects are added. So having the effects built in, and more specifically built into the presets, helped me get where I'm trying to go a lot faster. And then maybe my favorite thing about these synths, especially the Mini Juno, is that I can just hand one of them to a member of the band I'm working with, along with a pair of headphones, and ask them to mess around with it while I'm working with another member of the band. They just feel so approachable, so even if the band member doesn't know anything about synths, they have some fun messing around with it, and oftentimes come up with some really cool sounds or parts for the song that we never would have come up with otherwise. Then next up, we have my standing desk. Look, I'm about to turn 32, and while I don't consider that to be old by any means, it is old enough that I feel it when I'm sitting hunched over at my desk all day, every day. Ever since I got this, just being able to switch between sitting and standing throughout the day has made me, and my back, feel a whole lot better overall. I still have to sit for actual mixing work, as the sound is different with me and my speakers up at standing height, but I'm able to stand while editing, or tuning vocals, or doing session prep, or even sending emails or whatever. The one I got was actually just the bass, which I then attached to my grandma's old dining room tabletop. I thought it was cool that I could kind of customize it like that. It just feels a lot more relaxed and homey to me and less kind of generic. I'll link to that one in the description if I can find it. But there are also obviously ones that have the top built in. And hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss future videos. The next piece of gear I wish I bought sooner is the Audient ASP800 mic preamp. Alright, so this one has a bit of a weird story behind it. So it was maybe 10 or so years ago, and I was working at an amazing commercial recording studio with a beautiful Neve 8058 console. We were in the middle of a week-long session that I was assisting on for a fairly big artist when early one morning, the police show up at the studio and took the console away. Literally pulled every single module out of the board, boxed them up, and left us with just the frame. I don't think it's really my place to get into the why of this situation, But here we were an hour or two before our session without the console, which meant we were down 28 preamps. Luckily, we were able to get through the session using the outboard preamps at the studio, along with a bunch of pre's we borrowed from friends, including the Audient ASP-800. A while after that session, I was listening to those songs and realized I couldn't really tell the difference between the songs recorded with the Neve preamps and the ones without them. This led me to doing a bunch of tests and comparisons between different pre's, and I gotta say, I was really surprised. I'd always heard people saying online that changing the preamp makes a night and day difference to the sound, but that wasn't really my experience. Don't get me wrong, there was absolutely a difference. And to be fair, there's like no hard rule on what qualifies as a big or small difference, but it definitely wasn't a night and day difference to me. More like a 2 p.m. to 2:45 p.m. difference. And this is just with fairly normal levels, by the way. Like if you really push them to the point of saturation, to the point of using them almost like an effect, then yeah, the difference in the way they break up is more obvious. But I very rarely use them that way myself. But even when focusing in on the differences, I found myself really liking the Audient, even preferring it over some extremely expensive pre's in some of my tests. So back in my home studio, the Neve and API clones I had all got listed on Craigslist and were replaced with the Audient ASP-800. So getting back to how this all ties in with this video, there's two reasons I wish I got the ASP-800 sooner. First, it made it so I didn't have to think about preamps anymore. Like there are a ton of decisions you make that all add up to create the sound of any given element in a track. So just taking one of those away allowed me to focus on things that would likely make a bigger impact. I didn't have to think about whether my snare would sound better through the API or the Neve, and I didn't need to think about buying new mic pre's in an attempt to get the sound I was going for. I now had 8 channels of what I knew to be awesome sounding pre's. If it didn't sound right, I knew it wasn't the preamp's fault. The other thing I love about this unit is the 2 retro channels. On channel 1 and 2, you can run them as normal Audient pre's, or you can engage these 2 extra circuits. The iron circuit adds a transformer into the signal path, and the HMX adds a MOSFET circuit, which is supposed to sound kind of similar to a tube. You can then push either or both of these circuits as hard as you want with the drive knobs. I think this is such a cool way to experiment with color and mic pre's. With traditional mic pre's, I would never do a shootout or comparison of multiple mic pre's during a session. That would just be way too cumbersome when you've got a musician waiting to record. So I'd just make that choice based on past experience and maybe a little bit of guessing. But with the ASP-800, you can just hit a button and instantly hear it with or without the extra color to see if it adds anything to what you're working on. Seriously cool. And again, it's not a huge difference, but when it literally takes 2 seconds to compare, there's no reason not to try it. But moving on, next up is a great vocal mic. So yeah, much like a lot of people, I started out with some super cheap condensers for vocals, eventually upgraded to the SM7B, which was a huge improvement. But then, it was actually when I sold all those preamps I mentioned a minute ago, I used some of that money to buy a Lauten Clarion, which was the first great vocal mic I owned. And man, what a difference it made. I really think a solid vocal mic is one of the first things people should splurge a bit on for their studios. I think having the right mic for whatever you're recording is super important, but like, if you need to absolutely maul a kick drum with EQ and crazy processing to the point of changing the fundamental sound of the drum, it can still sound great in the mix. Try that with the vocals, and it just never seems quite right. Don't get me wrong, I'm not afraid to EQ a vocal. Especially for a rock mix, I'll often end up doing a pretty healthy boost somewhere in the upper mid-range to help it cut through. But it's usually a nice wide boost, nothing too crazy. I think it probably has something to do with how tuned in our ears are to the sound of the human voice. Combine that with the fact that vocals are probably the most important element in like 99% of songs, and I think it's just super important to get the vocal sound right at the source. And there are a ton of great vocal mics to choose from. Some of my favorites are the Lauten Clarion, the Lauten LA320, the Vanguard V13, and the Soyuz 017, both the tube and the FET versions. I've already got reviews of a couple of those on my channel if you want to learn more about them. But like I said, there are a ton of great options. But yeah, that's my list of gear that I wish I bought sooner. But I'd love to hear from you as well. Let me know in the comments what gear you wish you had bought way earlier. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.